everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming out today. We are about to have our full group here. As soon as Stephen Moore will be here momentarily, but I'm going to open it up and then turn this panel over to Jean Sperling to get us kicked off. I'm Maya McGinnis. I run the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget and the Campaign to Fix the Debt. Really glad you are all able to join us today. Our organizations are nonpartisan. Our leadership is bipartisan, and we don't endorse candidates. We don't have affiliations with parties. Our leadership is actually tripartisan, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. While we don't get involved in the political aspects of this, we have spent a lot of time in this campaign trying to focus attention on the big picture of fiscal and economic issues facing the country. And in doing that, this election, we've done a lot of different activities, including kind of during the primary, spending a lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire, talking with the candidates, talking with voters, holding forums. We had a partnership in New Hampshire with a TV station there called Fiscal Fridays, where candidates would come on and talk about the issues. We've been fact-checking the debates. We have a presence at many of the debates. We do forums around the country. And most recently, we've just updated our big report called Promises and Price Tags, which go through both major candidates' policy promises and the costs they would have on the federal government. So really excited to be able to talk about these issues today. We've found that there's a whole lot of interest in them, I think, as we've seen by a great turnout for this event today. I'm also really excited to be in this forum. So want to thank our partners, the George Washington University, and it's really neat to be in the venue where Crossfire used to take place. I think many of you know Crossfire, most of you do. For the younger students in the audience, Crossfire was just a great political show where it would usually have one liberal and one conservative policy expert coming to debate the issues. So it feels a little bit like what we're trying to do today. So to set the stage, I don't want to talk about the politics today. I don't want the fireworks we've seen in this campaign. We really want to have a chance, and I'm excited to do this, to have time to really dig deeper into the big pressing economic issues that are in the campaign. And there's so many of them. So we've already seen in the campaign lots of discussions about everything from economic growth, how to grow the economy, particularly at a time when there's an aging population, demographics are shifting, productivity is slowing. There's issues about poverty, economic security, income inequality, how different policies might affect any of these things. Everything from trade to immigration, regulation, taxes, and of course the issue which we focus on, which is the fiscal health of the country. Just to take a moment on that, the overall situation, the fiscal health of the country, is not strong in that our federal debt as a share of the economy is actually the highest it's been since just after World War II. And it's projected to continue to grow faster than the economy every single year. Deficits are once again growing, and they're expected to hit $1 trillion again in the near future. So there are fiscal challenges there, and these actually relate to all the other economic issues that we're talking about. So a high debt load means, for one, you're less prepared to deal with the next economic downturn when that comes along. It slows growth, slows wages. It can harm the standard of living for the next generation, which is one of the things that we want to be discussing in the campaign overall. So with that backdrop, I'm very excited to be able to bring in two of the most influential economic advisors from this campaign today to get into all these issues. They're going to both have time for opening remarks, and then we're going to have time for questions and answers, including questions from the audience. So it should be a great discussion, and that's the format we want to have, something that's really a discussion. So let me introduce Jean Sperling. Jean Sperling, of course, is an advisor to Hillary Clinton. I'd say he's one of the most influential thinkers in the Democratic Party. He's served as the head of the National Economic Council for not one but two presidents, President Bill Clinton, President Barack Obama, and he's developed many of the policies that we've seen coming out of administrations in the past. And then Stephen Moore, who will be with us. He was just on Fox News, and he's en route, and traffic in D.C. is so great, so I'm sure he'll be here any second. But Stephen Moore is the founder of Club for Growth. He served on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. He's an advisor, of course, for Donald Trump, and again, very influential thinker in conservative economic circles. So they'll both have time for opening remarks of about 10 minutes. Jean, you may get a small chance to go a little bit longer, so that will work out well. And again, we'll have questions, and we have, a lot of questions have already been submitted to me, but you can also apparently submit them on Twitter, and our hashtag is cleverly called eConvo, eConvo or eConvo 2016. So if as we're having the discussion you want to submit a question, just send it to us on Twitter. So I'm going to turn it over to Jean. Once again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. Jean, over to you.
You know, Maya, not everybody remembers Crossfire as that great show. Though I will say that, you know, as they say in Washington, as you get to know people, it is a better thing, and you can see sometimes the openings for common ground when you get to talk to people. When I was starting as Deputy National Economic Advisor in '93, I would say my opponent and nemesis was definitely John Kasich. And we used to, now it's Steve Moore. And Kasich and I mean, you know, the papers would go out, and we would do this show Crossfire, and it would just be, you know, bloody. It would be pretty bad. I'd say, we're only going to raise taxes on the top 1%, and Kasich would say, he's only going to raise taxes on the top 1% or people who breathe. If you're not in one of those, you're fine. And we'd go back and forth. And then one day the producer came out and said, could you guys just pull it back a little? And Kasich, who had never said a friendly word to me in his life, looked over and said, Sperling, did you hear that? We're on Crossfire, and they're telling us to pull it back. High five. So by the end of the administration, John Kasich and I actually worked on debt relief for poor countries together. So there's always a chance for bipartisanship. Let me start as I had my glasses on. I've seen the illustrious illustrious group out here. I can't mention you all. I can see Bob Reichauer. I can see Chairman Ken Conrad, who likes to tell jokes about me. None of them are true. But thank you all for being here. I do feel very strongly, and for all of us who do policy, that it is very easy to come out and start focusing on particular numerical targets, whether it's a budget target or a revenue target or a growth target, as if those are the end goals themselves of economic policy. But all of those things we work on, and they're very important, it is important to remember they are means to a larger end. And we have to remember what the larger end is. I believe in our country, I believe for Hillary Clinton, that larger end is having a country where the accident of your birth does not overly determine the outcome of your life, that you have an economy that has shared prosperity, that leads to a strong and inclusive middle class that allows people who are poor to work their way in without pushing anyone out, as opposed to the very significant economic inequality we see today, and that you have an economy that allows people who work hard to work with dignity, raise their family with dignity, retire with dignity. I mean, that is the end goal. In the end of the day, we have to measure our policies, not by the numerical targets that are means, but to that ultimate end. And that has to be the goal. And I think for Secretary Clinton, who I have known and worked with for 24 years, the focus on whether or not we are letting globalization and technology and finance hollow out the middle class or lead to a stronger, more inclusive middle class, whether we're reducing inequality, whether we're helping people work with and retire and raise families with dignity, is not an afterthought. It's not something you throw in at the end. It is the only thought. It is the North Star. It is what you guide all your policy choices by. And so for her, let me give a few elements of what a strategy is, because there's no silver bullet. You need a strategy to move the country towards those values, towards an economy that lives up to those values. And Steve, just to have fun, I'll say a few things about Donald Trump's plan at the end too. I think that you start with the idea that we want strong growth but fair growth. And that one of the best ways to start is to have a robust jobs plan that is committed to a full employment economy. So she believes that we want to have even a tighter labor market. I will tell you, there's a lot of great public policies that you do, but a tight labor market where wages are going up, where companies and employers have an incentive to look and try to hire people who may have obstacles is extremely important. And it's more important than ever when you're coming back from a historic recession. We have to, because you have more people who are long-term unemployed, who have fallen outside of the labor market, and you need more employers to not intentionally or unintentionally discriminate against the long-term unemployed, but to give people a chance to come back in. And you've seen some of the benefits of that tighter labor market starting to tighten in the last census report. That was good news, unambiguously. Poverty rate, the significant one-year increase in family income, but it's not enough. It's a step along the way. It is good news, but it is not the end of the result. So for Secretary Clinton, a jobs plan that focuses on a front-loaded infrastructure plan, which would not be fiscally irresponsible in the long run, but in the short run would lead to more demand, more tightening of the labor market, more giving people a chance who might be still facing the obstacles of the Great Recession. And I think you need to be smart about it. The thing about infrastructure is it's win-win. You're both creating jobs now, but you're investing in the productivity in future. And that's roads and bridges, but it's also water. It's also infrastructure to opportunity, job opportunity. It's broadband in rural America. It's school modernization. And I think more and more it needs to be thought of as housing as well, because I think we will be facing an affordable housing crisis in our country, and jobs through housing construction is another opportunity. Secondly, a focus on job location in the United States. Our focus for public policy is not simply to help anybody in any possible way have a slightly better bottom line because they have a headquarters in the United States. Our goal is to give incentives for those people who have a headquarters in the United States to create jobs and add value to the American people in the United States. And so when we look at tax reform, we want to look at how do we encourage more job location, more value add, more opportunity here. And some of that are putting up some negative incentives on exit tax, clawback against inversions. And some of it are positive incentives toward doing manufacturing, low-income community investment. Making it in America, a focus on manufacturing, a smart focus on the webs of suppliers and value that leads jobs to be here, on small business growth, which is jobs here in the United States that grow and expand here as well. Third, understanding that the need for greater security for families is both good for fair growth and for stronger growth. Now, jobs, people will change jobs. The winds of economic fortune happen, or sometimes bad employers happen. But it should not mean that when you lose a job in the United States, it has to have the devastating downward cycle that it sometimes does. The Affordable Care Act is a step in the right direction. If you look at Hillary Clinton's other agendas, paid family leave, child care, debt-free college, these are strengthening a safety net for working families. But it's not just a safety net. These are things that will encourage people to be more risk takers and do more growth. When you have the Affordable Care Act and the limits on pre-existing conditions, that says to a whole lot of people, you can leave your job and start your own business and not worry because you have a child with a disability. That is freeing up entrepreneurial activity. Having debt-free college frees up more young people to do public service, but also to take risks on economic growth. A child care, paid family leave policy means more women and other caretaking men, spouses can come into the workforce and create jobs. Fourth, the structural reforms for reducing inequality. I think that if we've learned since the 90s that even these tremendously good policies that Bob Greenstein and others have championed on the EITC and refundable tax credits that have done so much to reduce inequality are still not enough. There are structural issues from stronger collective bargaining to new bargaining strategies to the tightening regulations on Wall Street, the CFPB, the minimum wage and Fight for 15, focus on long-termism that are equally or at least complementary important to fighting inequality and for shared prosperity. And for skills that starting with early childhood education, but focusing not just on college opportunity, but every type of college or higher education, from credentialing to skills to apprenticeships. All of these are incredibly important. Now, on Donald Trump, I don't know where to start or where to end exactly, but I'll hit two issues, just so that, Steve can get a little focused, and you can do like a Hillary Clinton shimmy, maybe, like that. I will be honest, the things that concern me the most do go beyond economics. It goes to the impact of the fabric of our country, to the type of language we have from leaders, whether they bring us together or tear us apart, whether they make us all feel we're part of our country or make some people feel they're less part of our country. But I think when we look at economic policy, I'll hit two things so I save time. One is immigration. Now, it used to be that when you did a debate like this, there was one area you'd usually agree. Usually Democrat, Republican advisors would agree that having a comprehensive immigration policy would be good, both for the benefits of having people have a path to citizenship, come out of the shadows, be able to negotiate for wages, pay their taxes, not suffer the humanitarian challenges of families in fear, and then the high-skilled immigration as well. CBO estimates that the Gang of Eight plan would have raised growth by 3.3% over 10 years, 4.9% over 20, productivity higher. Well, it's not just that we have one candidate who's against that. He is for the polar opposite, a plan that would round up 12 million or more Americans, that would try to deport people, that would have more people living in fears in the shadows. You don't have to cite Democratic economic advisors. Whether you're talking from Douglas Holtz-Eakin to Mark Zandi, people see this as hurting millions of jobs, hurting GDP significantly. This is a very plan that is as flawed economically as it is morally. Secondly, taxes. Now, Donald Trump ran for most of this year on a tax cut plan, and I give him some credit. They're creating some new things, some do-over abilities. Apparently, you can run on something for 10 or 11 months, and if it's convenient, you can kind of murk it up and muddy it up a little near the end. But let's just remember what the plan was initially. Tax Foundation and Tax Policy Center both thought that it was $10 to $12 trillion over 10 years. They both agreed. $34 trillion over 20 years impact on the debt that the Tax Policy Center found. The top 0.1%, 1/10 of 1%, people averaging $5 million in income, we're going to get more than the bottom 60% combined, according to the distribution analysis, and the top 1%, nearly 90% more. Now, they have a new plan. Now, my 10-year-old daughter, Nina, loves the movie, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. I would think of this as the sequel in which Donald Trump's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad tax plan was repeated, but you just took out the words no good. Still terrible, horrible, very bad. So what does it stay at? After all that, $6 trillion of costs. I have to remind you that that's still considered quite a lot. $6 trillion, 10 years, zero capital gains. And still most amazing, an insistence that all business income would be at 15%. I know they like to blur it a little, but I don't think they lie to the NFIB. And Donald Trump's out there every day pounding this. 15%. Let's just think about that. Of the 400 richest Americans making $150, $200 million a year, over half of them have business income that they could use. Half. They would now be getting a 15% tax rate. By Donald Trump's own plan, a single filer at $37,500 would be paying 25%. By his own plan, he would have the most well-off Americans in our country, the people who have benefited the most from the rising inequality, paying less in marginal taxes than a single worker at $37,000. And then let's look at what the impact on the middle class is. After they reform their plan, here's what you see. The only time they're really fiscally tightwads is when you're trying to do something to help middle-class families. Their paid family leave is maybe the least generous paid family leave I've ever seen. It is 6 weeks. It's remarkably called maternity leave. It's just for moms. It's a nice plan for the 1940s. It's 6 weeks, maybe $275. It costs $2 to $3 billion a year. One of the smallest items they have. But on this, you have to pay for it. How do you pay for it? By cutting unemployment insurance. So on this one item, when you're trying to help out families, you've got to actually hurt other families who are suffering from unemployment. Second, their plan, and this is according to the Tax Foundation's distribution analysis, the top 1% would get 275 times more than the typical family in the middle. 275, that's September 23rd, Tax Foundation blog. And so then you say, oh, that's not fair. Let's look at what the effect on after-tax income was. Well, the Tax Foundation, this is the static analysis, found in their initial plan that in the top 1%, your after-tax income gain would be 3 times higher in percentage terms than the middle-class families. Now when you look at it, it's 14%. 14%. Table 8, page 12. Don't take my word for it. And then finally, we see the NYU study by Lily Batchelor that has now been confirmed by the Tax Foundation and everyone that Trump's plan would actually raise taxes on 25 million working families. Now, it's clear this is the case, but you're probably thinking, well, gee, it must have just been a glitch, a little mistake. Really hardly. I mean, they get rid of the personal exemption, which is $4,050. But then for a single or head of household, they only increase the standard deduction by $5,700. How hard is it to know that if you've got 2 or 3 people, you're worse off? The estimate Lily has is that at $75,000, a family would pay $2,440 more, or even if they had $8,000 in child care tax cuts, $1,640. So when you're looking at what your focus is, when your focus is middle-class families, when your focus is helping poor families work their way up, you don't revise your tax plan and then on how you can pare down benefits for these folks, actually raise taxes on middle-class families, on single moms, on getting rid of the household status so you help hurt single parents, a single father, a single mother who's raising children. You don't make that choice, you don't make that accident, because if that's your focus, if that's your only thought, you're going to get that right. I know I went a little longer. I give you all the equal time. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for being a few minutes late. Gene, good to see you're still the king of the filibuster. Let me start by just telling you a quick story about how I got involved with Donald Trump. And he was not my first choice or my second choice, but I'm good friends with Corey Lewandowski, who many of you know was the original campaign manager for Donald Trump. And he called me about 9 months ago or so. I think it was late last year, and said, would you like to meet Donald Trump? And I had never met him. And so I said, yeah, you tell me, when and where, and I'll be there. And he said, well, he's going to be at an event in Dallas. He's going to have, quote, a little political rally there, and why don't you come and meet, you can, participate in the rally, and then afterwards you can have some time to talk to Donald Trump. And I'll never forget this. I flew to Dallas. I flew to Love Field, which is the secondary airport in Dallas, and they said it'll be in Hangar 12 at Love Field. So I got on a little tram and went over there. And really, I had no idea what to expect. Donald Trump had just sort of announced not too long before this, and so I was curious about what was going on. And it was one of the most amazing political experiences of my life. I've been involved in politics for 30 years. And I show up at this hangar, and ladies and gentlemen, there were 6,000 people there. And it was like a Rolling Stones concert. You know, it was like, when is Mick Jagger showing up? And the most interesting thing about it was I got there about an hour before the event started. And so I just went out and talked to these folks. Who are these people? It was kind of a life-changing experience for me. It really was. I went out and I met these people who had been there 3, 4, 5 hours to meet with Donald Trump and just see him. And I realized there's something big going on in this country, really big. And you know, the people I met there were plumbers and school teachers and construction workers and bus drivers and a lot of veterans, people of every color, blacks, whites, Hispanics, a lot of soccer moms there. I remember there was a big group of, you know, with senior citizens now, the big thing is going on, you know, motorcycle, not gangs, but, you know, they go in big groups of motorcycles, a huge number of motorcycles parked there. And these are the people who are sort of the backbone of America. They were strong, patriotic Americans. And I talked to them, I said, what are you doing here? And they felt, the word that I heard most from them was betrayal. They felt betrayed by Republicans, and they felt betrayed by Democrats. They hate Barack Obama. They think, as I do, that almost everything he's done on the economy has been wrong. But they're not too happy with the Bush years either. And I think about this for a couple of reasons. By the way, thank you for having one of the deplorables here today to address you. But a couple of things. I mean, you know, I mentioned that deplorable thing because I think that was a really key moment for people to reflect on. I mean, this is truly what liberal elites think about working class Americans today. That they are racist, they are sexist, they are xenophobes. Now, Gene, I don't agree with everything, you know, these folks say. I'm a very pro-immigration guy. I'm for pro-trade. But there is a very much, this is an elitist versus populist election. There's no question about it. And Hillary represents the elites. There's no doubt about it. And I do think we're going to crack through this blue wall. And I think one of the reasons Donald Trump is going to be the next president is we're going to win millions and millions and millions of working class Americans who feel that this is no recovery. And, you know, by the way, the first thing when I met with Donald Trump, the first thing I said to him, he said, you know, I'd really like you, I've followed your stuff for years, and I'd love you to, you know, come on and work with me as a senior economic advisor. And I said, well, Donald, the first thing I said to him, by the way, is I said, you know, Donald, I don't know if I love you, but I sure love your voters. I mean, I love these people. They are the backbone of America, and their voice has not been heard. And that's why the most important thing that Donald Trump has said in the last year was when he said at the Republican convention, I will be your voice. Because these people don't have a voice in Washington today. They've been abandoned, frankly, by Republicans in the Bush years and certainly by Obama in the years he's been in office. And I think, and I said, I can't work for you, though, because I'm free trade. And, you know, I know you're more of a protectionist on trade, and I don't know if you really want me. And he said, Steve, look, we can agree to disagree on that issue. But, you know, I want you to work with me on energy issues and fiscal issues, tax issues. And I think that's interesting, because can you imagine someone, you know, coming in to interview with Hillary Clinton saying, you know, Hillary, I don't drink the Kool-Aid of global warming. I don't think I can vote for you, work for you. I mean, she would kick that person right out of the office. So there's a disagreement, you know, within the Trump campaign about the right things, but I agree with him 80% of what he wants to do, and I want to get that off my chest. So let's talk a little bit about why people are so angry and why people are so resentful. And, you know, Gene can talk all he wants about how wonderful thing is in America, but guess what? Most Americans just don't agree with you. They don't. They feel that this has been a recovery that's been no recovery at all. You see this in the polls, that still about 40% of Americans think we're still in a recession. This is 7th year in a recovery, and they think we're in a recession. You've got 2/3 of Americans who think we're going on the wrong track. And they see the statistics. You know, when Lester Holt opened the debate, I was there on Monday night, and he said how wonderful things are, you know, and Gene, you said we got this great census report and so on. I mean, what country is he talking about? And to some extent, there are two countries. There are two Americas today. In fact, if here in Washington, D.C., we're booming. We're booming. People, I'm getting rich. Gene, you're probably doing well. People probably in this audience are doing well financially. No question about it. Washington, D.C. is booming. 3 of the 5 richest counties in America today are Washington. That's the problem, right? That's why people are so resentful and hate Washington. Silicon Valley, San Francisco, booming like I've never seen before. I just got back from there. New York, Wall Street, doing really well. The stock market, no question. I'll give the one thing that Barack Obama has done pretty well is we've got a nice stock market recovery. But you know, you go to places like York, Pennsylvania, or you go to places like Flint, Michigan, you go to Detroit, you go to, you know, just not even the inner cities, but just kind of middle-class areas around the country in Wisconsin, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Michigan, even on the West Coast, and people are really hurting. They're hurting out there. This has not been a recovery for them. So what we're saying is we need a radical change, and what Gene just gave you was basically 4 more years, right? I mean, let's just keep doing what we've been doing for 4 more years. And frankly, if people feel, when they go to the polls in November and they feel, you know, things are pretty good, we can live with more and more years of this, you know, Hillary will win the election, no question about it. But if people want real change, and I think they really do, I think there's such a hunger in this country for change, I think Donald Trump can win a landslide election. Now, what are the policies? A couple things. Let's talk first about the tax bill, because I think you, with all due respect, Gene, you misrepresented what we're going to do. I think almost everyone in this room would agree that our corporate tax system is a complete disaster. I mean, if you don't know much about what's happening with our corporate tax structure. It is an abomination. It's probably the worst tax system in the world. We are exporting our jobs. We're exporting our businesses. We see it day after day after day. We've seen Burger King, Medtronic, Walgreens wants to leave, Pfizer wants to leave, but you won't let them leave. You've got, you know, one company after another that want to leave this country, and there's, you know, we don't have to say, gee, why are they leaving? Why are all these companies leaving? They're telling us why they're leaving. They're leaving because our corporate tax is way too high. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Everyone in this room knows it. Mark, you've worked on these issues for years. You know it. I mean, we have a corporate tax system that's completely dysfunctional. It's anti-American. It's unpatriotic. It's unpatriotic to support our current corporate tax system. And we've known this for years, and Barack Obama in 8 years hasn't done anything about it. I always say the only 2 people in America who don't think we should cut our corporate tax rate are Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Now, we came up with this idea of a 15% corporate tax rate. You know why? We want to make America go from the highest business tax rate in the world to one of the lowest. I think Ireland would still be lower than us. I think they're at 12.5%. You want to see a magnet for jobs and manufacturing and businesses come back to America? You cut our corporate tax rate to 15%, you're going to see that giant sucking sound you're going to hear is companies just fleeing back into the United States, and some that have left and some that have never been here. So we have a huge advantage. But one of the things Donald Trump told us about the tax plan when Larry Kudlow and I sat down with him, he said, I don't just want this to be for big businesses. I know Gene, you know, has a problem with this. Yes, Gene, we're going to cut the business tax for every one of the 26.5 million small businesses in this country. And we're proud of that. That's the centerpiece of our plan. And you're right, a lot of rich people own small businesses, but you know what? They hire people. This is the part Hillary doesn't get. Remember when she said businesses don't create jobs? I think she really thinks that. She thinks that businesses create jobs. Every single small business in America is going to get a 15% tax rate. What are they going to do? And by the way, here's where you got it wrong, Gene. That money is not going to go to the owners of the company. We're very clear on this. You get the 15% tax rate when you reinvest the money into the company. If you take the money out in a wage or salary or as a dividend, you're taxed at either the dividend rate or the individual income tax rate. So it's just for money that's reinvested for, you know, for things like capital purchases, hiring more workers, building a factory, hiring, you know, purchasing more machinery, that kind of. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. And Gene, I'd love your response on this because you and I are both economists. The evidence is quite clear, I think overwhelmingly clear, that and I learned this from Mark Bloomfield and others, you know, that what happens is, how do you get higher wages in this country? You need business capital purchases and capital investment. And that's not what's happening in this country. I mean, the sorriest statistic about the economy right now is businesses just aren't investing. They are not reinvesting the profits they've made, partly because I think they're just terrified of the next thing Washington's going to do with them, to them. So if you cut that rate down to 15%, you're going to see a huge flow of investment. We estimate about $2 trillion of additional investment. Now, you said this is going to hurt the working class. The Tax Foundation, which you mentioned, says that if we put in place our plan, after 10 years, the average American working class, not rich people, the average middle-class worker will see a 9% after inflation increase in wages. Now, that may not seem a lot to you, 9%, but when you consider that for the last 10 years, and by the way, I disagree with you that the Census Bureau report was a good news report. My God, the average middle-class worker in America today, according to the most recent Census Bureau data, says that since 2007, the average American, the middle-class American, is poorer today than they were 10, 11 years ago. What kind of recovery is that? It's no recovery at all. So we are going to give them a 9% increase in their wages, whereas for the last 11 years or so, actually the last 15 years, you go back to 2000, there's been no pay increase at all. And we feel very proud of that. We feel like that's the centerpiece of our plan. One other quick point, because I've run out of time. Energy policy. I mean, this is where there's just no comparison. I mean, did you all hear what Hillary Clinton said in the debate on Monday night about energy policy? This woman wants to have the federal government buy $500 million solar panels. I mean, that's laughable. We're going to get, what, we're going to give $20 billion to your friend Elon Musk? I mean, really? That's an energy policy? Ladies and gentlemen, we have the capacity in this country, and Donald Trump is so right on energy, and Hillary is so tied to the radical green environmentalists, she can't go there, which is we have the capacity in the next 5 or 6 years not only to become energy independent in this country, but we can become the energy-dominant country of the world. Senator, you're from North Dakota, I believe. I mean, what's happening in North Dakota is amazing. And now it's tough now because the energy price has fallen. But, you know, the price of oil rises and falls. And next time it rises, we're going to see so much new investment. We're so ahead of the rest of the world in terms of oil and gas technology, fracking, horizontal drilling, all of these other things. By the way, I've been saying, I told Donald Trump the other day, you know, sir, I think I underestimated that. I said we could become energy independent. We can be the next Saudi Arabia for the next century. We have more oil, more gas, and more coal than any other country in the world. If we start using that, we're talking about $200 billion a year in additional output. $200 billion, we get 1 more percentage point more of GDP just by producing American energy, something that Hillary won't do. So we believe, I'll just summarize by saying this, we believe we can get to 4% growth for 5 years, up from 1% now. And we get 1% more growth from our tax plan, and we get 1% growth from our regulatory and our energy plans. And if we do this, we can see rising incomes, not for the rich, but for middle-class Americans who have been left behind.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you for your opening comments. We covered a lot of ground. I'm going to take the opportunity to drill down on a couple of the most important topics and see what else we can come up with. Let's start with economic growth. So economic growth is clearly one of the biggest goals of no matter what your priorities are, it's going to make everything easier. We have challenges with economic growth because we have the aging of the population. And so we're not going to have nearly as much growth coming from the labor force. We're going to need to see more in productivity. I want to ask a two-part question, and I'll start with you, Steve, which is talk a little bit more, and you covered this in some more detail, but talk about the single policy that your candidate is recommending that would do the most for growth and why. And then, in the spirit of bipartisanship, talk about one of the policies from the other campaigns that you actually think would help with growth and what you support from their platform as well.
Well, I think, you know, the two things I mentioned, you know, the tax policy is so critically important. I mean, I don't remember whether you were you in town in 1986, the last time you know, I was here in 1986, I was working for Ronald Reagan. And, you know, we did, I think, what was one of the great public policy achievements of the last 50 years, which was the 1986 Tax Reform Act. And that was an amazing accomplishment. I mean, you covered it, you know, back then. What we did, it was very simple, something that I think all economists should agree with. We cut the rates and we broadened the base, you know, making for a much more efficient tax system. High tax rates are highly distortionary, there's no question about it. And high tax rates mean that deductions and loopholes are much valuable. If you do the Hillary Clinton plan and you go back up to rates that are 45 to 50%, you're going to create another industry of tax lobbyists and lawyers and loopholes and so on. So the reason I bring up 86, why can't we do that again? It's been 30 years since we've cleaned out the barns of the tax system. I mean, it's messy and smelly in there now. We've got to get the rates down, and we got to get rid of the deductions. Now, the reason you're wrong about this idea that somehow we give this big tax cut to the rich people, we don't give them a penny of tax reduction based on the average. And here's the reason why. The way we devised our tax plan, Gene, is we said every reduction in every single dollar of reduction in tax rates to get down to a 33% top tax rate, we pay for that by eliminating loopholes and credits and deductions for high-income people. And we did a dollar for dollar trade-off. So yes, they're going to get a lower rate, but we're getting rid of all the loopholes in the tax system and the deductions that rich people take advantage of. Because look, the top 2% get well over half of the cost of the deductions. You know this, Maya. So we think there's dollars in the sidewalk to be picked up by lowering the rates, not just on individuals, but on businesses. And then, the energy I covered, I think, God, what an incredible opportunity we have on energy. And liberals are just so wrong. I mean, 500 million solar panels? Really? When we have $2 natural gas, and natural gas is a wonder fuel. It's made in America, it's incredibly abundant, it's cheap, and it's clean burning. I mean, why wouldn't we use our natural gas rather than give all this money to Elon Musk and send it to China? So we think that. And the third I'll just mention is regulatory. I mean, there's a new study out by the National Association of Manufacturers that we've lost 1.5 million more manufacturing jobs under Barack Obama. That the average regulatory cost per working in manufacturing is $19,000. I mean, that's a huge cost, and that's something that leads businesses and manufacturers to leave for Mexico and China and India.
Hillary Clinton's platform, is there something from there that you would say would be pro-growth and that you would support?
I don't know, and Jean can talk a little bit about this. I mean, she has, one thing I kind of agree with her on, I don't exactly understand the program, Jean. I love this idea of having workers become owners. And what you guys have talked about with respect to, employee stock ownership plans and things like that, a great idea. We ought to also let people take 5 or 6 or 7 or 8% of their Social Security and put that into equities. I mean, my God, one of the big problems, and there is a rising inequality problem because more of the returns are going to capital, what better way to let workers share in the returns to capital than own the companies that they work for? So that's an idea that I think has a lot of merit.
Jean, what do you say about that? Do you think we can get growth up? What are the policies that are most likely to get there? And what do you like about Trump's plan in terms of growth as well?
That'll be tough, so I'll keep thinking about that till the end. So, you're right, obviously, that we face, we're in the middle of an inevitable demographic shift. And so, and you have a bit of lower participation rate that is baked into the cake. And so that's going to obviously impact growth. I don't believe, though, that there are not things we can do. I don't like this thing that happens in elections that you see. I think a little more on your side, which is we'll just find somebody somewhere to write that our plan will lead to 7% growth. And I just want somebody to write a plan where I also grow to 6'2" and have a six-pack, because it's about as plausible as a lot of these plans. So I think there are things that we absolutely could be doing better. I think that moving more towards a full employment economy where you really focus on a tighter labor market, getting people back in, increasing the participation rate in ways that you can with policy, such as having policies that allow people taking care of children to make it easier for them to come into the workforce. Taking away, again, I think there's many of the things that you do for family security that also would give people more comfort in being risk takers. I do believe that one of the mistakes that was made was not a Barack Obama mistake, it was blocked by the Republican Congress, was that in 2010, 2011, 2012, that would have been a tremendously important time to have had even a more significant rebuilding modernization plan. One, because there's things we need to do as a country. You don't get fiscal discipline points for deferring deferred maintenance. You don't go that somebody's a responsible parent because they're saving money by not fixing the leaking pipe in the basement. So when you have an opportunity to put people to work and to also do things that you need to do for the productivity of your country anyways, those are win-win things that can strengthen the labor market. When I listen to Steve talk, it does really hit me that this is, you know, a very fundamental difference between trickle-down economics and kind of bottom-up economics. We believe that it's not just that the middle class does better if you get a GDP number higher, but that by strengthening the skills and capacity and opportunity and security of middle class families and rising their income, that leads to more demand, more growth, greater participation. We believe that a stronger middle class is what leads to greater economic growth. And so when you're aiming at those things, it's not this intervening and distortion of the economy. It's empowering your economy to be at full strength. Now, a whole lot of what you've heard there is all based on the most, I mean, I feel like you were mentioning 86. We could go back to the 80s. This is basically, if you cut taxes significantly for the top 1%, there'll be this tremendous dynamic effect. I mean, I think the Tax Foundation does nice work, but their dynamic scoring is outside the bounds of anything else that we see. And so based on that, you try to suggest that tax cuts for the most well-off are still what's going to be the job creator. That's what Trump said at the debate. When Hillary mentioned cutting taxes for the wealthy, his response was, the wealthy create the jobs. So I think you have a fundamental difference in what leads to stronger growth. I think we need greater demand from the middle class. I think we need measures that get more of them involved. I think that we do have, I think, a problem with some people who've been hurt in the recession, who've not recovered, who need a tighter labor market to give them a chance to come in. I think housing is underperforming now, is not contributing to GDP what it normally is. I think that will be good for the supply. I think that will be good for jobs. I think that will be good for home prices. So I think there are very important things that we could do. But I really do think this is a day and night perspective. This is fundamentally the cut taxes for the most well-off. This will lead to dynamic impacts that will trickle down to the middle class. And I will point out there's no evidence this has worked. And the problems that we had with this country fall mostly from the financial crisis, which were not a failure of progressive economics. It was a failure of a period of cutting taxes for the most well-off and a completely hands-off approach to Wall Street and finance that led to us as a country having the worst financial crisis and the greatest run-up in the debt and most of the problems that we're dealing with. So, you know, we disagree. In terms of things I like, well, first of all, let me just say one thing. One thing that I'd say about working for Barack Obama and working for Hillary Clinton is I have never felt that they have had this focus that things are great or that our focus is to just point to the good news. And that's not what I did in my talk either. I think that Barack Obama will be remembered for the quick action that was taken. I think even George Bush will get a little credit for acting quickly to at least start the saving of the auto crisis. And that we have come back, and that when you look at jobs created, when you look at the fact that, remember what Mitt Romney's goal was if he was elected? 6% unemployment by the end of his first term. We're now at 4%. I think that we as a country are capable of recognizing when something has gotten significantly better than it was, but is not nearly good enough. And I think when we point to the positive things, we are pointing to positive things that have happened for families moving in the right direction. But the whole premise of Secretary Clinton's campaign is that things are not good enough for middle-class families. They are not good enough for poor Americans trying to fight their way in. That's the whole aspect. So I would say that while I don't like most of the policies, and I think when you do try to do things on child care, et cetera, they're small, they're regressive, they're deductions, you did support a little bit of refundability in your child tax credit. And I welcome you to the consensus on that. I welcome Marco Rubio and others that want to join Hillary Clinton in increasing the EITC for single players. And you did talk about having a little bit of a match for low-income families. I don't think it's enough, but I think those are the type of things that I think are, those are a couple of things in the policies there that if they were done in a more robust way as more of a middle-class oriented plan, I think would show some promise.
Okay, that was a pretty good Washington compliment for something you liked in the other plan. I'm going to agree with you on one thing, and it's your leaky pipe analogy, and I will just share a quick story, which is last week my air conditioner broke, and we got a leaky pipe in the basement, and I decided just to shut the door to the basement. And so judging from the smell in the house this morning, that was the wrong choice. Yep. And deferred maintenance is not necessarily the best thing for your home or the country.
Don't get fiscal points for that.
Yeah, that was wrong. All right, well, I'm going to switch the topic to national debt. So as one of the kind of facts that I laid out when we began, the national debt as a share of the economy is projected to grow indefinitely. It is projected to grow faster than the economy. So my question to you, and we'll start with you this time, Jean, is that something that candidate Clinton worries about? And we've talked about growth. Of course, debt as a share of the economy, it's both the debt and growth. There's a numerator and a denominator. Right. We've talked about growth, but what I want to know is there something that your candidate would do to try to change that trajectory on the policy side, on the numerator side? And then to you next, Steve.
Well, make a few points. Number one, I do feel that, as you've seen and what your own analysis or your organization's analysis shows, is that Secretary Clinton has tried to live within the basic constraints of trying to, when you have a new proposal, trying to say how it should be offset. It's why your own analysis finds that her plan is almost deficit neutral. I think you said it was $200 billion expansion. We would disagree. We think the things we'll do on the corporate tax side will raise. We also think immigration reform, as has been projected by CBO, would bring in significant revenues to the federal budget. But I think that effort by a presidential campaign, when there's so much pressure to just, say anything, and when your opponent, from your own estimate, has a cost to the debt of 26 times that amount, I think shows that, $5.2 trillion, I'm just quoting you, your organization, shows, I think, a seriousness of purpose on taking the long-term fiscal situation seriously. That said, as I said before, these targets are not the end in themselves. They are means to an end. And when you come into policy, you have to ask yourself, what is the most important thing for those larger goals of a country that has a strong, inclusive middle class, makes room for people to go move up? And it is hard for me to say right now that that is the fundamental crisis we face in the country right now. It is, to me, much more the issues of economic inequality, of the middle class security, because we don't think things are good enough either. We think you can acknowledge that the 2015 census report was a really good report without acknowledging that things have been where you want over the last 20 or 30 years. So I think that it makes sense as you come in now for that focus to be to get the tighter labor market, to get the investments. Those, to me, are the central focus. The second issue that I think I've, really take seriously is, I've been involved as much as anybody in those painful budget negotiations. But what you also do see is very large forces have quite a significant impact on our deficit and our debt. So all of the policies that were argued back and forth on Medicare, et cetera, meant nothing compared to the larger forces that led Medicare and Medicaid to have a baseline of $1 to $2 trillion less than was projected in 2010. One of the most remarkable things in our country is that we're spending less over this period on health care, even when you add the Affordable Care Act. Imagine that. You've added 20 million people to coverage, and you're spending less. Now, I don't think we know all the different reasons that healthcare costs to the government have come down. But I do think there should be a strong consensus that looking at places where you can move from fee to service, where you focus on value over volume, and taking seriously these larger issues on healthcare reform is much more propitious than going back. And so I think one of the things that I think Hillary Clinton is trying to do is to focus on how to strengthen and build on the Affordable Care Act, but also fill the holes that are affecting working families, but also strengthen those measures that move us more to value over volume, that put pressure on costs going down without the value of healthcare going down. So I think you have to look, at these things very seriously. Now, over the next 6 years, 2015 to 2020, the average deficit is a little under 3%. Now, I recognize that after that, things start to go up, and I think she does as well. But I think what we have right now is a period where we focus on increasing demand, increasing a full employment economy, getting growth up, which will help, obviously, with revenues, and taking a smart, responsible approach to what we can do that increases the chances that we have a fiscally sustainable policy without just without going to cuts and benefit cuts for people that could be completely unnecessary for our fiscal future if we were to make the right fiscal choices and the right healthcare choices. So I do think that she is serious about it. I think she understands it. But I think she also understands that most immediate focus for our country right now is, I think, building a stronger safety net for working families that gives them more security and the ability to take more risk, and strengthening a full employment economy that will increase demand, wages, and start to see middle-class families doing better and inequality decreasing.
Well, a couple things. I mean, first of all, look, Gene, you've been a friend of mine for a long time, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to take a lecture from you who've worked in the Obama administration about the national debt. I mean, come on, really. I mean, this is a president who has borrowed more money than every other president from George Washington through George W. Bush. I mean, what's happened in this country under you were one of his economic advisors, is a fiscal atrocity. I mean, we've borrowed $9 trillion, and as Donald Trump said, what have we gotten for it? Nothing. I mean, we borrowed a lot of money in the Reagan years, no question about it. We rebuilt the American economy in an incredible way, one of the biggest booms in American history, by supply-side tax cuts. You said they don't work. Why did they work so well in the 1980s? My friend Larry Kudlow has a great book out I recommend to everyone in this room called JFK and the Reagan years. And it's about how John F. Kennedy cut tax rates. That was another supply-side boom. We want to do that again. Liberals say we can't get to 4% growth. We had 5 and 6%. We had quarters of, you remember this, Mr. Reichauer, we had quarters of 8% growth under Reagan when we cut taxes. Obama hasn't created 1 year of 3% growth. You talk about the census report. Yeah, it was pretty good. But if you look over the whole 7-year period, it's been catastrophically bad. And by the way, for the last 6 months, the U.S. economy has grown at 1%. I'm sorry, that's pathetic. We should be growing at 3 or 4%. We haven't had a recovery. As Trump said very correctly, this has been the worst recovery from a recession since the Great Depression. I worked for Ronald Reagan. We took office during, everybody in this room remembers how horrible the economy was in 1980. We had 20% mortgage interest rates. We had 14% inflation. America was completely deindustrializing, just as it is now. And we cut taxes, and we saw this great boom. We had 1 month under Reagan where we had 1 million jobs. So we can do this. This idea of, the new left-wing line, you've heard this probably from people like Larry Summers, who worked for Barack Obama, 2% in growth is the best we can do. This is secular stagnation. It's the best we can do. Hell no, we're America. We can grow at 4 or 5%. Why not? We're in a technological era where we can grow much, much faster than this. If you want to ask people around the country, I've been on the road probably 20 of the last 25 days, in cities all over this country. And the one thing I always say, that my biggest laugh line when I talk to audiences, is that the unemployment rate in this country is 5%. People roll over in laughter at that statistic, with all due respect, Gene, because they know the real unemployment rate in this country is 10, 11, 12%. We're not counting the millions of people who've dropped out of the workforce. Now, you asked the question, can we get people back in the workforce? Hell yes. Create jobs, reduce taxes so they have an incentive, they can keep more of their after-tax earnings. That leads to more people coming into the workforce. In the 1980s, when we cut tax rates, we saw the biggest increase in labor force participation virtually in this country's history. And it's because the policies created jobs and made it more valuable to work. So in terms of this issue about our $6 trillion tax cut, whatever you said it was, we think it's closer to about $2.5 trillion. That's out of $40 trillion of revenue. And we're going to cut spending to make up the difference. We're going to cut government spending. And one last thing I'll say, and then take whatever other questions you might have. You know, Donald Trump the other day asked me, just one sentence, how can you summarize the difference between what we want to do and what she wants to do? And I think we put it pretty well. We said, we want to cut taxes to make the American economy grow. Hillary Clinton wants to raise taxes to make the government grow. And frankly, you were right. This is a night and day election, folks. You couldn't have two more opposing economic outlooks in terms of what we can do in this country. And as I said, if people think the last 8 years have been good, vote for Hillary Clinton.
Well, you know, I remember when we came in and President Obama inherited the economy of milk and honey left to him by George Bush. It was morning in America, things were great, and then I guess according to Steve, Barack Obama decided to borrow $9 trillion. So in case anybody wasn't alive then and listening, I know you got to be pretty young, in the fourth quarter of 2008 and the first quarter of 2009, in the 6 months he came in, the average GDP was negative 7.8%. Now, I just want you to just think about that for a second. We think of a good report as, did it go up a 0.5? We were losing, this is what he inherited, about 8% contraction as he came in. We were losing 800,000 private sector jobs. Now, today, the market moves. If you gain 210 versus 170, a 40,000 swing, we were losing 800,000. The reason the debt went up was because we had the worst financial crisis in the history of our country, and it would have still been the worst financial crisis had John McCain and Sarah Palin come to the rescue. What happened was he moved quickly and decisively, and against all odds, we actually started to pull out by 2009. And everybody knows that when you have that kind of deep, historic financial crisis, growth is more difficult. And the thing that blocked higher demand for growth was a Republican Congress. And what happened after that rise in the debt? We were about 10% of deficits. It went down to under 3%. Barack Obama, and I'm sure he'd be saying the same thing if it had been John McCain, has seen the deficit fall by about 2/3 since he came into office. And by the way, just for the record, I do believe that you can have 4% private sector growth because that's what happened under Bill Clinton. 4% private sector growth. That was while you raised taxes from 31 to 39.6%. That was with all the things you said that would tank the economy, everybody said. There is no evidence to that point. We can do better in growth. I agree. I don't buy the whole secular stagnation thing. Okay. But the idea that you're just going to return to the glory years of trickle down, or that Barack Obama's debt numbers are due to his wasteful policies as opposed to the historic financial crisis that he inherited from a Republican administration is not something that
well,
anybody
the
should
unemployment
accept.
rate, according to your own numbers, I mean, the first thing you came in when you came into office, you borrowed $850 billion, one of the biggest wastes of money in history.
Oh.
And by the White House's
by the
White House's own estimates, your own economists, I don't think you were there. Maybe I don't know if you were there at the time. They said they predicted what the unemployment rate would be if we did the stimulus plan and if we didn't do the stimulus plan. And it turned out the unemployment rate was actually higher than in other words, we had a higher unemployment rate, according to Barack Obama's own estimates, than we would have had if we had done nothing. So you wasted $850 billion.
So the reason I'm going to jump in is because I want to focus on what's going
Okay.
forward and where you
Okay.
both
But we have to
your
get the
vision for
history
going
straight, because it
forward.
really is important.
Well,
we
and
wasted
I'm also
$850 billion.
gonna
We should
take-
never do that
$800
again.
billion
I'm also gonna
that
take the
provided
moderator's
demand
prerogative,
when there was no
and
demand
I'm
in the
gonna
global
point out,
economy.
Gene-
Yeah, but then
and
why
saved
was
our
the
country from
unemployment
a
rate higher
depression
than you said
is
it
a
was gonna
waste
be?
of
Okay,
money
we're
to
not
Steve
doing
Moore.
crossfire. We're not doing crossfire. So what I am going to point out, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, and I'm going to point out that my question was not just about how we're going to grow our way to deal
How
with the
to
debt
cut the
situation,
spending.
but how we're going to deal with some of the policies. And what we are on track for the next 10 years, if we do nothing, is to add
Trillion
another $9 trillion to the debt. And neither candidate, by our accounts, has a plan that would put forth policies that would bring that debt trajectory down. I think it's fair to say it's really hard to talk about those trade-offs when you're campaigning, but whoever wins is going to have to govern. And in the next 4 to 8 years, that's going to have to be confronted. So I would say there will be policy choices that will have to be dealt with. I'm going to try to, oh, thank you. I'm going to quickly try to get in some of the questions that we have, not from Twitter because I left my device over there. But I do have some good questions there. If you want to slide that one up, Jim, I'll try that too. So Sylvan Lane has a great question. Sylvan from the Hill says it's been 8 years since the last recession, and another one is likely to happen within the next 4 years. So what would your advice be to your candidate to do to handle it if a recession came along? And let's try to keep these short so we can get in a couple more questions.
We're going to get 4% growth for 5 years if
Right.
we put in place our, no, we're going to get 4% growth in over 5 years. That's like adding another Texas to the U.S. economy. And this is sort of the heart of your broader question about what we're going to do about the deficit. It's very simple. If we have 1 to 2% growth for another 4 or 5 years, you just can't get from here to there. You can't get anywhere near a balanced budget with that level of growth. One of the reasons we had, you're right, I was working for Newt Gingrich in '95. We had some historic budget agreements. We cut the hell out of spending. I mean, I give a lot of credit to Bill Clinton. We cut government spending from 22% of GDP to 18% of GDP, exactly the opposite of what the Keynesians wanted. The Keynesians wanted more spending, and we got a big boom in growth from that. So I think you get 4% growth, just one statistic for you all to keep in mind. Every 1 percentage point increase in growth over 10 years gives you $2.5 trillion more debt reduction.
But if we
So
did
that's
have
huge.
a recession,
Will we have one?
if we did.
If Hillary is elected.
No, but
we'll
if,
I guarantee
if we
that.
did and President
Yeah.
Trump were in there, what would be your policy prescription to deal with a recession?
Well, we have an economic growth plan. We're going to do the tax cuts. We're going to do
Same.
the
So it's the
energy
same
plan.
plan.
We're going to do, we got to, look, we have a plan to grow the economy. I think it's going to work pretty quickly, but it may take a while. We're going to stick with the plan.
Well, as I said, I think that the jobs plan that she has, I think already should be front-loaded. I think you would go to more front-loading if you saw a serious weakening in demand. I think we should be strengthening the automatic stabilizers in our country, strengthening Medicaid, strengthening unemployment insurance. I think one of the reasons why GDP did not come as strong was, if you ask what was different about this recovery than a lot of recoveries, it was that in past recoveries, you saw a surge in state and local spending that made a very big difference in GDP and unemployment. And what you saw was contraction going on a long ways afterwards. So having the assistance to ensure that more automatically, without having to go through, default, threatening budget negotiations, that we were putting more help to people who would need help because of the recession that would not be their fault, but at the same time, automatically, while helping families, putting more demand in the economy, is a smart, sensible thing that we as a country should be doing.
Thank you. Question from Martin Burns from AARP, and the question is, what is your plan for Social Security? And I'll just add an observation that we had from Monday night's debate, which was that Social Security and health care account for well over 50% of the total federal budget. They account for over 3/4 of all of the growth that's projected going forward, and they took up 0% of the discussion. So I'm going to broaden this discussion about Social Security to what would you do about entitlements. You talked a little bit about health care, so you could elaborate on either of those.
Well, first of all, I think it is important when we're talking about Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid to be very clear on when we're talking about an issue of cost rising faster than they should and when there are just more people. So when we talk about Social Security taking up more, it's not because it's too generous. It's simply because we have a baby boom and there are going to be more people. And I think that it's very important to not give people the perception that we're having these explosions because somehow things are not under control. I think now in healthcare, we have had times in our country, very long periods, where because healthcare costs are growing so much faster than GDP, that healthcare costs are an issue for the overall economy. As I've said, Maya, I think the things we do in these budget negotiations where we argue off the CBO budget options book pale in comparison to having smart healthcare policy in our country that can have more value over volume. And I think that should be a central focus because we've seen that the numbers are overwhelming when you get a slowdown. And the fact that you could get a slowdown while still providing 21 million people more coverage is quite good evidence that it is possible to do more with less when you have smarter healthcare policies. Now, we got to study why those are happening, and they may not be for all good reasons. On Social Security, could not disagree with Steve more on the privatization options or Donald Trump supporting privatization of Social Security.
And by the way, he does not. I was talking for myself now.
Fair
just
enough.
To be clear.
Though he's had some great you'll be comforted to know that he's made some very strong pro-privatization plan messages in his past. I think that what we've seen is that I've always been one who believes in like the three-legged stool. I would like to see people have strong home equity. I would like them to have strong Social Security. I would like them to have a strong pension. I think that is the best thing. I think we should be aiming for that as a country, and I think progressives should be aiming for that. However, we did see in the financial crisis that your pension and your house value can be at risk. The one thing that is rock solid is Social Security. And I think ensuring that Social Security is rock solid and stronger is a very strong and smart thing for us to do. And I do think that many on the progressive side have, I think, made a very compelling case that we policy-wise should be thinking more about how to expand Social Security than how to reduce it. And I think Hillary Clinton's put forward proposals on caregiver credit, raising the minimum benefit. So I think when you look at Social Security, I do not see how anybody can look at Social Security and say the problem is it's too generous. If anything, we face a retirement crisis. So I think we need to figure out, and I know it will require difficult financing decisions, how we can be strengthening Social Security, strengthening the part of the retirement three-legged stool, the part that is rock solid, not subject to the whims of the market, and then at the same time, figuring out how we can turn our system around on tax incentives for savings so that we're not giving the greatest savings to the 1%, but we're doing more to incent savings on the working families who have the hardest time putting aside a little extra for their future.
Just one quick thing on the top 1%, because Jean's brought it up 15 times. Income inequality is the highest in America today after 8 years of Barack Obama. Everything that Barack Obama has done has made income inequality worse. If you're in the top 10% in income, you're doing really well in this economy. In the bottom 90%, no gains at all. So you keep talking about how you're going to reduce income inequality. You've had 8 years to do it, and you've made income inequality worse. So that's just a fact. The new Gini coefficient came out in the Census Bureau report. The Gini coefficient went up again. So your policies to reduce income inequality have actually made it worse. Now, we're not going to cut Social Security. That's simple. And when I want to make it very clear to the reporters in this room, when I talked about my personal idea of that I favor of allowing people to put optionally money into a personal account, that's my idea. It's not Donald Trump. Here we are 3 quarters in this debate, and I apologize. I haven't brought up the biggest catastrophe of the Obama administration. How did I leave this out? Obamacare is a true catastrophe. It is, I know that Jean is praying that this thing doesn't come apart before November 7th, but we see every month we're seeing what's happening with the insurance companies drop out. We're seeing that premiums going up. You know, thanks to Obamacare, my premiums this year are going up 16%. I go around the country. The one thing that Americans complain about most to me when I talk to audiences against working class Americans is Obamacare is just destroying their finances. And that's why they don't believe, by the way, that inflation is 2%. They say, if you looked at what's happening to my health care bills, we have got to repeal Obamacare. And that is one of the first things we're going to do. You want to talk about something that will rejuvenate the economy, get rid of Obamacare. We can cover every single American with health insurance, and we will do that. But you can do it at a fraction of the cost of Obamacare. We ought to get rid of the first 50 worker rule. We ought to get rid of the 30-hour-a-week rule, which is reducing the number of hours worked in this country. I think the single most entitlement reform is to repeal Obamacare and do it on day one.
Do you know that, I think every major thing that we've made an advancement in the country on, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, or now the Affordable Care Act, absolutely, you need to keep working on it and strengthening that. But the idea that they have a plan that would do anything but take America back in a very bad place of healthcare is belied by everyone who's looked at it, including Republican experts. You should see a New York Times piece where it has from Gail Walensky to, I think, Lonnie Chen to virtually every public policy expert on the Republican side, almost mocking the Trump plan. So the CRFB, this bipartisan, nonpartisan organization, looked at the Trump plan and found, well, you know what they used to say about me in basketball? I couldn't jump, but I also wasn't quick. They found that it would cost over 20 million Americans their health care and then still raise the deficit by $500 billion. That's pretty good. You're going to reduce by 20 million. I mean, I think one of the biggest policy frauds that we see all the time, that's a strong word, is that the Republicans have put forward a viable plan that would replace Obamacare and still provide coverage to as many Americans. I really wonder about the governors who have to sit there and wonder what would really happen. And by the way, if you look at the Trump website, they repeal everything. They repeal even the protections against pre-existing conditions. How excellent would that be for our country? We can go back to a time that if you have a child with Down syndrome, or you have a disability, or you have someone in your family with a heart condition, that you should fear ever losing your job or fear going out to start your own business for fear that you would not be able to get affordable health care again. So, there's been a lot of scare tactics done on Affordable Care Act, and I look forward to the day that Republicans come in good spirit and want to fix what's not working or make things better. But the idea that there is a viable plan to repeal, look at their study, look at the Commonwealth study. The only disagreement between them is one says 21 million less people would have coverage, and the other one says 25 million less people would have coverage. And both say that Hillary Clinton's plan would add coverage from either a few million to 9 million. So which direction does America want to go in?
Well, you can trust Gene on this because we're all saving $2,500 a year on our health insurance, right?
Well,
I mean, I'm paying $4,000 more for my health insurance. So this is killing middle-class families, Gene. It's a disaster.
Okay, we're going to be night and day on this one, is my guess. We have a ton of good questions. We do not have time to do all of them. I'm just going to tell you some of the topics. So when I ask you the last question from Twitter, because that will make me feel more technologically advanced, you can also squeeze in any answers on other topics. There were additional questions that I didn't get to on trade. Why is trade such a contentious issue in this whole election? And how do you feel about that almost as a political issue as well as an economic issue? There's questions for you, Gene, about where your administration would be, on business tax reform. There's a lot of questions about public investment and whether there are areas we should be doing more public investment in. So I'm going to end on this last question. Again, you can expand it to look at it, including closing remarks or other comments as well. But Jane Adams on Twitter says, with technology rapidly advancing, do you believe the future of employment will need to include minimum income? And I would also just kind of expand that question to, Do you look at technological advances?
Wait, sorry, say that
So
again.
the issue about a minimum benefit, a minimum income.
Oh, right.
There's a big discussion out
Yeah.
there about whether technology is going to make
Right,
it
right.
harder to have
Robots and
jobs.
things like
Yes.
that.
So do you look at technology as something that's going to help with job creation or hurt with it? And are there policies that are related to that that your administration would deal with? So that's actually like 5 questions. You can answer which one you would like.
Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to? Okay. I mean, a couple things. What was that first thing?
Trade, there's
trade.
trade.
Oh, yes. On trade.
I mean, you've
Look,
written
I guess
about
here's
trade.
my view on trade and immigration. I'm pro-trade and I'm pro-immigration. Gene, you know that. We've talked a lot about this. So, but there is no doubt that there is an anxiety out there about trade and immigration. I mean, it's a reality. And I actually feel like people like myself who are pro-free trade, we haven't made the case strong enough to American people about why trade is a good thing. And so I sort of feel about this, the same thing on immigration. It's very simple. You know, you're right, there are all these comprehensive plans about immigration reform and but you know what? The American people have made it very clear. They want one thing first. They want the border secured. And as pro-immigration as I am, we're not going to get anything done on immigration until we get that border secured. And by the way, Barack Obama will build that wall. I don't know if Mexico is going to pay for it, but we're going to build a wall. And so really, I think we can't be ivory towered about this. We have to do something about securing our border, and then I think Gene and I probably would agree on 90% about immigration, high-skilled immigration, and things of that nature, getting people to the best and the brightest in this country. And by the way, that's where we're going to get the labor force growth. That's one of our comparative advantages in the world. On this issue about robots, and I mean, people are sending me articles all the time, robots are going to destroy all the jobs and so on. You know, look, we went through this, 100 years ago. It used to be 100 years ago, 30 to 40 Americans out of 100 worked in agriculture. And then we had modern farm equipment and, technology. Now, two out of 100 Americans work in agriculture. And what happened was people shifted to other jobs. So I think this technological change that we're seeing in the digital age and robots and things like that, they will, replace many of the traditional jobs, and we've got to create more jobs in other areas, whether it's, Silicon Valley types of jobs, nursing. The one last thing I'll say, and this is not a policy point, but, it is true, there are a lot of jobs out there today. The problem that I think we all have to agree with, maybe there could be a bipartisan consensus about this. How do we get, the problem is that we're graduating kids from high school and college that just don't have the skills to fill these jobs. If you know how to do something, if you've got a rational skill, you can get a job in 48 hours in this economy. But, if you have, as one of my friends, a guy named Bob Funk, who runs the biggest employment agency in America, he puts 800,000 people a year into jobs in Oklahoma City, and he's a temporary employment agency. He always tells me, Steve, you send me somebody who doesn't have a sociology degree, a psychology degree, or an ethnic studies degree, and I can get them a job in 48 hours. So we have to just think about, and actually Barack Obama has one idea that Obama, I agree with him on, is community colleges. I agree that we need better community colleges and to provide the funding for them to provide people with the skills that are needed in this 21st century economy.
Gene.
I think if there's one thing that when you have the privilege or the responsibility of sitting in these jobs, I think the one thing that you have to bring with it is a high degree of humility about the future of the economy. You do the best you can, you work incredibly hard, you look out everything, but you don't know all the time. I can't say that in 98 and 99 that you foresaw all the things that were going to happen. You saw, not going to make anything about the administration, just about the economy. I think that a lot of the information technology impacts were kind of helping Americans. We were kind of first movers, our small businesses were using it. Then we saw the next decade, I'm not going to say it's all political because who was in the office, you saw globalization putting more wage pressure down on US workers. Now, you can't just say, well, that goes against my view of the world. You have to, your North Star, for me, the North Star for policy is, are you helping having a stronger, more inclusive middle class? Are you giving poor Americans a chance to work, to move up? And if you see developments happening that are going against that, your North Star, your rigid part is not the policies you proposed at some point. It's that goal, and you have to be willing to change policy or affect that to reach that, I think, fundamental progressive goal for our economy. Now, on technology, I agree with Steve that most times in history the people have had this worry. It hasn't worked out that way. That, the classic is obviously the horse and buggy industry, et cetera. You don't know. I go back to the White House, there's social media jobs that were never there before. So you have to have a certain humility. But part of that humility is also recognizing that a lot of very, very smart people who are on the technology side do feel this time could be different. So does that mean I think we need to do radical new things now? I'm not sure, but I think it's very good that we're having the policy discussion about what it could mean. In the meantime, though, I think the idea that because there's Uber or because there's technology, maybe we should be thinking more about the safety net for contingent workers is a little elitist. We only start thinking about this when there were, because there are cool sharing economy companies. There have been people doing housework in our country. There have been people caring for elderly people in this country. There have been people working individually from their homes in this country who have never had the security that other Americans had. So what I would say is, let's start building an economy where the basic dignity of raising a family in terms of childcare, sending them to college, having health care even if they have a pre-existing condition, is not as contingent on what happens in the flow of jobs and technology and change. I think it makes sense to be doing that now regardless. If we do find there's more disruption, at least we will be doing more to make sure that people have the basic dignity of work and family, and that those transitions do not send people spiraling down. And I do believe in raising the minimum wage, and I do believe on stretching the limit, and I do believe in the fight for 15, because I do think that we need to make sure that, it was Bill Clinton's initial line, if you work full-time in our country, you shouldn't be raising your children in poverty. That's an economic goal, that's a moral goal, that's a value goal. So I think it's good we're having this discussion. I think we all have to have a bit of humility about the future, and we need to be willing to adjust policies as needed, because the policies are the policy are the means to the goal. And the goal, the fixed goal is this an inclusive economy that provides dignity to workers, opportunity to those who are low income? That's the goal, and you have to be willing to adjust as you see economic change take place.
Okay, so on the behalf of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget,
Thank you for hosting us.
This was really exactly what I had hoped we would have, a discussion where we really got to delve into the issues. This is actually for us the beginning of a series that we're going to be doing, delving deeper into policy issues, and I could not have asked for two better guests to help us kick it off. So thank you for joining us, and thank you very much for joining Gene and Stephen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve.
I think we're going to be